Welcome to the Look Good, Move Well podcast.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hey, Satya, what's going on?
Hey, Marcus.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Although I've been seeing you for the last 5 hours since we've been here at the gym, but it's nice to see you all dressed up. That was a quick costume redecoration.
We've just been moving today.
We have been moving, yeah. 10 minutes ago, you were in sweaty gym clothes, and look at you now.
Yeah. I'm still drinking my recovery beverage.
It
doesn't go with my outfit.
It's not Pepto-Bismol. If anyone is watching this, she's got a pink foamy drink next to her.
Oh, yeah.
Then this is the
Gaines juice.
What's Gaines? Yeah, Gaines juice. We're coming back to a topic that we covered not so long ago, and which is often the case. It's like we put out information and then we get a lot of questions like almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And it informs us that, hey, maybe we missed the mark and not completely, covering the topic, or, hey, there's additional layers of information that people want to hear. So just bring it back rather than wait till it's like, been enough time between the topic. We're just going to stay on it.
Yeah. So
the topic is on really reverse dieting. What is reverse dieting? And sort of the questions that came along with some social media posts that we put out recently on Story, and then also in newsletters. So how would you frame the question, or what was, how would you frame the question that we got most from feedback from people?
Yeah, well, I think that we've been talking about the topic amongst ourselves fairly frequently over time, and especially more recently. And we sort of take for granted a bit this framework of you need to be in a caloric deficit if you're trying to lose weight, and you can't stay in a deficit forever. So how do you actually take the next step when you're done with your diet or your cut, or you're ready to ramp back your calories up?
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people kind of got stuck on that part, because we got a few comments like, what is reverse dieting? And whoa, walk me through this whole thing from day one.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's actually I think if we take a step back and we just like, what's the bigger question, bigger picture thing that's going on here? It's that I believe people they're not ignorant to what it takes to lose weight.
Sure.
And they, at various times in their life, have gone through weight loss periods, but then they end up gaining weight back. Mm-hmm. And so it's really a question of like, well, what do I do after I've dieted?
Right.
To either maintain what I've, the new weight or the body fat that I've lost, keep these habits alive, and not revert back to what I was doing before. And reverse dieting is not the answer to all of that. Where that starts with is really looking at what your, mindset and behaviors are that you are shifting in order to achieve, a change in, weight. And whether you are approaching them as, this is something I'm going to do for the long haul, or this is something that I am doing, because I have this goal. And really, like, that is kind of the categorical difference. Like, if you approach it as, I'm doing these things just to achieve my goal, then there's almost certainty that you're not going to maintain those changes to your body over time. They'll come right back. And it's not a matter of like, when, it's just like how long until you gain your weight back. So this is where, so where does reverse dieting come into the picture here? It's, the way I see it, it's a tool to help people who are stuck believing that the only way that they can maintain, a lean physique or like the body fat that they've lost is to continue to eat in the same manner that got them there. Mm-hmm. And that is, that's kind of potentially a recipe for disaster for people. You could draw analogies to a lot of different things. For me, it was like, this is how I trained to win the CrossFit Games. If I want to keep training, if I keep training like this for the rest of my life, I'm going to probably, crash and burn. Like, it's not sustainable. Right. And with dieting, in order to achieve fat loss, you're supposed to be in this caloric deficit, which feels at some point, it will feel very difficult and hard and your energy will be low and you'll feel hungry and you'll have cravings and you might start sleeping poorly and your energy might drop. And okay, now you're in this point. What do you do? Like, I believe that this is the only way for me to maintain this body. If I eat more, I'm gonna, suddenly balloon back up to the weight that I used to be.
Right.
And I actually suffered from this like really badly in my early 20s. I got visible muscle definition in a way that I'd never had before, when I was like 20 years old. Mm-hmm. And I did it by eating in a pretty, it wasn't like a super dramatic, but it was a relatively, low caloric intake and deficit. And I did it for, 6 months and got really lean. And then I was like, well, this is it. I can only eat this way. Mm-hmm. If I eat more, I'm going to lose this. And, I stopped seeing the progress, the results. And so what did I do? I started to work out harder because I wanted to maintain what I had.
Right.
And, I started to feel cravings. I started to really struggle with like, oh my gosh, I want to cheat all the time. Like I can't keep it up. And, this is like, I used to live in an apartment with my college roommates and I would only buy like the foods that were on my diet. Of course, they bought whatever they wanted. And I remember like stealing food from them, like at night, like taking my like roommates' granola bars and like slathering them in peanut butter and just being like, oh my gosh, I need calories, and I didn't know what was going on at the time. I was like, I felt bad about myself. I was like, you suck. Like you can't stick to a diet. What's your problem? And so what I do, I started working out harder and, kept the calories the way they were. And I just had no concept of what I was doing. And I ended up in a a really stressed out state. So it was like that kind of diet combined with like really getting like in the weeds in school, like my final year of my pre-med courses, like pulling late nights and then going and training super hard and then finding every opportunity I could to like add in little extra workouts. So it's like, now I wasn't just lifting at the gym, but I was like, I got my weighted backpack and I was doing like these ruck hikes up in the, Berkeley Hills. And I was riding my bike on the weekends, like for hours and doing just a lot more activity and just burning myself down. And, I ended up with a pretty severe back injury that basically made everything come to a grinding halt. I stopped all of my training. I was in pain. Like I basically just was like, well, nothing matters anymore. Like the diet was out the window, it was all a mess. And so really my mission and so much of this education stuff is like, let me help you understand what I didn't know at this time or what I didn't know in my history and could have saved me, some pain and suffering.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that it's so useful to give people the tools to apply to different situations because I think so many people are trying to just get to the part where they are making the changes in their body that their goal is. Like, yeah. I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to lose weight. I want to get leaner. And then it's like, well, then what? And there isn't a lot of talk about the then what. Mm-hmm. So that's what this is really here for, to show you how there's an ebb and flow and what to do as the next step when you have attained the end result that you were seeking in the deficit.
True. Yeah. And I think more so than like, this is the recipe that you follow when you reach, a goal or you spend a certain amount of time. Think of it more conceptually. And I really think that the picture or the analogy of like the campfire is really, really a strong visual for people to think about. Your metabolism is this raging, burning campfire, we hope. And then when you want to lose body fat, you start to, go into this calorie deficit. You start to remove energy and that fire starts to kind of get a little bit dimmer. The wood is burning. And now the fire's lower and lower. So after months of dieting, the fire is very small. And after 6 months of dieting, your fire is essentially just like hot coals. Mm-hmm. There's no flames anymore. It's really slowed down. This is called metabolic adaptation. Your body starts to find ways to slow down, slow you down, how much energy you're burning. In my story, this is when I started to feel those cravings. My body was telling me, go get more food. And then it was also wanting me to slow down, and I was forcing myself to work out more. So when you have a really low, just burning coals at the campfire, what do you do to get that fire going again?
Right.
Somebody comes in, I got it. They take 10 logs and they chuck it on the fire. And big, big logs that are wet. They're just dense. And the fire just gets, and those little coals, they get completely smothered, and there's no flame. It doesn't get the fire going again. It completely puts it out. And so that's like when you're in this really low deficit in your diet, and your metabolism has kind of adapted and slowed down, and you're go back to eating 1,000 calories a day more than where you were at. Your body's not burning hot. It's still burning slow, and you just added a bunch of energy on top of it. So what's it going to do with that? It's going to use some of it, and it's going to store some of it. It's going to store a lot of it. So this is when people rebound big time quickly out of their, they reach their weight loss goal, and then within a few weeks or in a month, it's all the weight's back on.
The yo-yo.
Yeah, the yo-yo. This is the yo-yo. So how could you do, what's a different approach? Well, I come in with a few little twigs, a piece of newspaper. I toss that on the fire. Oh, the paper catches fire, the twigs catch fire. We get a little bit of fire going. Good. Okay, hey, now grab the smaller little pieces of wood, put that on. The smaller pieces of wood catch fire. We're starting to build this fire, starting to rage again. Within, maybe a couple more additions of small pieces of wood. Now we throw the log on, and the first log catches fire. And then we add more, and it catches fire, right? And so we build the fire back up. We did it slowly. And this is where, I think it's, it's important to think of dieting as it's not just dieting down, but it's dieting back up. That's reverse dieting.
Mm-hmm.
People think of dieting as cutting calories. Really, diet is any intentional approach that you take to eating. So you could do a caloric deficit diet. You could do a caloric surplus diet. You could do
a paleo diet.
Where you're just selecting certain food groups. I'm doing an intermittent fasting diet. There's time restriction. Diet is obviously connected with the culture of dieting, which is trying to be skinnier and look away. And, there's a lot of negativity connected to it. But if we think about just what are good approaches to eating intentionally to make, longer term changes, then we have to think you're going to come down if you're trying to lose weight. And then you got to come back up in a way that doesn't, make all of the hard work that you just put in evaporate into nothing.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the questions that people were asking a lot about is how you determine how many calories and for how long you're going to add a little fuel to the fire, and what's the time span, the total time span where you're trying to ramp up calories, and how do you know when you've reached that, and just how do you go about implementing a plan for caloric intake again?
Right. Well, in my research before, when we were writing some of these articles that we put out, I stumbled across somebody, and I want to say it was maybe Precision Nutrition, an article that basically it described it in a really, really good way. It gave a framework to think about, which is, how fast or how slowly you want to reverse, the diet. It's going to depend on a couple things. It's going to depend on how desperate are you for more calories? Let's use an example of you find a group of individuals who have legit been starving for, there's been famine for a year, right? They are desperate for more energy. You tell them, hey, we need to slowly ramp you back up. So instead of the 2 kernels or the 2 rice kernels that we have had the last couple of days. I'm going to give you 4. And meanwhile, there's a whole plate of like cake over on the side. They're like, what are you talking about? Give me the cake. Like, I don't care. Like, I'll fatten me up right away. You know, it's like their tolerance for basically gaining a bunch of weight is massive. They don't care, right? There's a deep, deep need for, you know, so that's very extreme. Whereas somebody who's, you know, they're not at their ideal body weight, their goal weight, but they realize like they've been doing the dieting thing for quite some time. They've been cutting calories. It's time to sort of take a break. You know, we recommend like, don't go for more than 3, at most 6 months, you know, really trying to lose body fat without taking a break. Otherwise, you know, you're going to run into some of these metabolic adaptation issues. So for that person, like they don't have a lot of tolerance for gaining weight back. They want to keep it pretty consistent. And so what would that person want to do? Well, they would want to have a slower ramp up back to their, you know, maintenance caloric intake. So it's like, what's your tolerance for adding weight back? What's your tolerance for, you know, like not eating more calories? Like, have you been in just such an aggressive, you know, caloric deficit that you're having just crazy cravings every single day? And so that might dictate how quickly you come back. But I laid out a framework of like, let's take the total number of calories that you've been in a deficit. So if you've been in a 500 calorie caloric deficit per day.
Under maintenance.
So we define deficit by, this is my maintenance. I have 2,000 calories is what I burn on average every day with all of my activity, my basal metabolic rate, my NEAT, my digestion, all those things. I burn 2,000. I've been eating 1,500 calories a day for 3 months. And that has yielded 12 pounds of fat loss. That's amazing. That's 1 pound of fat a week. That's about appropriate for a 500 calorie deficit for that long. Awesome. But now you're starting to see that your results you're not getting the same results. Yeah. The results are slowing down. Your energy's kind of sucking. Your gym workouts suck. Your sleep's a little off. You're a little cranky pants. Like, all right, do you want to live like that for another 3 months? Because you probably won't see another 12 pounds. You might see another 3 pounds, but it's like now it's like diminishing returns. Yeah. So it's like, okay, we got to take a little break. So on day number 1, 3 months and 1 day, what could you do? You could start eating 2,000 calories a day. Now that's jumping right back to your maintenance. And because things have slowed down, you might see a little bit of a rebound in your weight. Are you okay with that? Well, no, I worked really hard for this. I'm not okay with it. Okay, well then alternatively, why don't we think about those 500 calories as a gap that we need to make back up, and we're going to make it up in even intervals. We're going to take a month to make it back up, 4 weeks to ramp you back up to that. So in the first week, I want you to add back a quarter of those calories per day. So instead of adding 500 back immediately, you add 125 back. And guess what? That feels kind of like adding a little kindling to the fire. Oh, you know, you're going to like that. That's, you know, that's whatever. That's close to 10% increase in calories in a day. Yeah. And you're like, that's stoked. Like that's a whole added, you know, chicken breast or, you know, some rice or, you know, blueberries and a little bit of yogurt in the morning that you didn't get to have before. You're like, okay, I'm happy about that. And now with that little bit of energy for the first week, your body starts to wake back up. You start to move a little bit more. You get the energy back. Your brain's a little less foggy. You start to sleep better. Workouts are better. Cool. Next day, or excuse me, the next week, you add another 225. So now you're at 250 calories from where you were at the end of your diet or your deficit, you know, your cut, and so forth and so forth. Now here's the cool thing about this is that one, you're moving things back slowly and slowly. So you're building back your fire. Your metabolism is starting to crank again. You start to feel better. You might use this energy. And in reality, you know, you're still kind of, your theoretical maintenance is still 2,000. So as you're adding these calories back in this 4-week process, you're starting to feel better, but you're technically still in a deficit. So there's still some positive changes that could be happening from a body composition standpoint. And that's where it's very interesting to just look at how different people go through this. Like they start to add food back into their diet and they feel like they're getting leaner.
Yeah. So many people say that.
So many people say that, like, oh my God, I just got a DM and I screenshot just yesterday that I was going to post. I was like, hey man, I started listening to your thing. I started eating a little bit more and man, I like started losing body fat.
Yeah.
I was like, well, this is what's happening. It's like you were under eating to a point where you were like low motivation, low drive, training sucked. Like you just weren't doing the right things. And now you started adding it back and you're moving more and you're still in that, you know, calorie range that promotes some change to your body. So if that person, you know, in that example, after 4 weeks, we get them back to 2,000 calories a day, then it's likely that they've probably kept almost all, if not maybe a little bit more of those 12 pounds of fat that they lost. Now they're back at a maintenance level of calories, which is very sustainable. It feels good. They've got better habits and practices in place. They were methodical about how they came out of it. And now I would suggest, hey, hang there for another month or two. Practice good training principles, recovery principles, you know, like you can have days where you eat off the plan and you just kind of make sure you keep averaging out your 2,000 calories and getting your protein in. And then after 2 months, if you feel like you still haven't reached, you know, your desired body, then let's do it again, you know, and this is more of a controlled, slow, step-by-step process versus like, I'm just going to go into this calorie deficit and I'm just going to hard charge it for a year. And this is where you're going to crash, you're going to yo-yo back up, you're going to crash, yo-yo back up. And then after a year, have you made like the progress that you want? Most likely not. And so these weren't this arbitrary numbers. It was like, I was dieting for 3 months. I reversed it out in a month. So it was like a third of the amount of time that you were dieting.
Great.
And just break it up into even intervals. Now, if you had a big, you know, if it was more than 500, if you were doing 1,000 calorie deficit, you have a little bit more room to make up. Maybe you want to, you know, space that increase out a little bit more. But again, it comes back to your tolerance of like, I need to get back to baseline. I need to get back to maintenance because I'm like struggling mentally and I'm okay if I gain back a couple of pounds. Like a bodybuilder who cuts down for a show, contest, you know, and they get down to like these crazy low body fat percentages for the contest, like they're fine if they add back some body fat because like they know they don't need to be anywhere close to that for the rest of the year. So they might take 2, 3, 4 weeks to ramp back up, but they were in like a 3,000 calorie deficit or 2,000 calorie deficit at the end. So like they're really thirsty for some energy.
Yeah. What I like about this a lot also is that I have heard from people who are afraid to add back calories in because they worry that they're just going to go out of control.
Yeah.
And they're worried that changes will happen to their body after all of that hard work that they're not going to be in control of.
Yeah.
So I feel like it gives you an opportunity to just make a small change and hang out for a week or so and see what that does. And maybe you are feeling awesome at the end of that week. Hopefully you are. And so it's positively motivating you to keep going on that trajectory rather than, oh, I'm just going to like end my diet, eat whatever. Now I feel totally out of control of the process and out of control of my relationship with food.
Yeah, totally. And I think people that are nervous about making, like, I'm not going to be able to control myself. There's probably an underlying relationship to food that, you know, hasn't been addressed and probably, you know, goes back to why they felt like they needed to lose weight in the first place, is that there was an emotional or mental disconnection that was getting like fed by, you know, food to soothe and to take care of themselves before. And now it's like, I have this sort of propensity to like overeat already from my history. And now I have to like figure out how to add food back in. And they were likely in very big deficits. Like the people that were really under eating have the harder time coming back out of these caloric deficits because their brains are just really thirsty for energy and calories. So that kind of is, categorizes that person that would feel that way. And it might inform them about like, well, okay, maybe a better approach is to do this in a little bit more of a steady, calorie deficit approach.
Great. I'm just going to check our list of questions and see if there was anything else that people were really...
There were several questions about like hormones and how this impacts hormones.
How does it impact hormones and how does it impact your energy? Two common ones.
Yeah. Well, so and there's more and more research coming out on this. As a matter of fact, I just linked to an article or a kind of a review of kind of some current data and research on the topic of like, where's the healthiest body composition or body fat range. And so this kind of doesn't necessarily equate to calories specifically, but we're talking about caloric restriction. I mean, at some point, a caloric restriction is either going to take you from, an unhealthy body fat percentage into a healthy range, or from a healthy range into an unhealthy range, being too low. So you can be too high, you can have this kind of sweet spot in the middle, and then you can have, body composition that's too low. And what they do is they look at like contest prep, physique competitors, bodybuilders, and they can track, basically, let's say they start in their off season or they're at the end of their kind of off season, they're at 18% body fat, and then they're going to compete at 4%. So they have all of this body fat that they're going to lose, and they track changes in mood, in energy, in hormone levels. There's sort of a threshold that they cross where, okay, this level of leanness up until here, like we didn't see any negative impacts, and then suddenly now we start to see almost linear decline in energy, in like hormone production, in mental health, all the way till they reach, their contest preparation leanness. And then when they come back, it's almost like everything rebounds correctly. And so caloric deficits in dieting are not bad on hormones and on energy and on, mental health in and of themselves. It's a matter of when you reach a particular level of a certain body composition, and that is different for each person. And alternatively, if you go the other direction and you're eating in a surplus, or you're overeating, or you're not very active and you're putting on body fat year after year after year, there is a point at which, okay, now you've reached a body composition that is too high, where it's negatively impacting hormones, it's negatively impacting mental health, it's negatively impacting your energy. And so I think probably in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we'll get a little bit more precise with what that window and that range is. The question I end up having too, though, is what does, which I don't think there's a lot of information and evidence and data on yet, and I at least I haven't seen, is that, people that are in lower percentages of body fat are typically in caloric deficits that accompany those. So they're not only low body fat, but they're also low caloric intake and low energy. Is there a combination of those two that leads to some of the hormone disruptions and some of the mental health and energy declines? Or if somebody is low body fat, like, hey, you're 9%, 10% body fat, and you eat, 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day, but you also burn a lot, does that person suffer some of the same, declines in hormonal, mental, physical health? So that's kind of the answer to, does this affect energy and does this affect hormones? It certainly does. And then in terms of like the reverse dieting part of this conversation, you know, just like rebounding back quickly or rebounding back slowly, both seem to just positively impact things. Like if you're, you know, if your hormone production is down and your mood is down, and, you know, and you just start eating a lot more the next day because you were like in too much of a caloric deficit, like you start to feel better almost, you know, immediately. Like, so it's the reverse dieting and doing it slowly isn't a tactic to like improve, you know, that portion of your health. And with that said, people who are, you know, attached to a certain look in their body, if they reverse diet too quickly and they yo-yo back up and they lose the shape that made them mentally feel good about themselves, you know, that could potentially have an impact on their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not could, it certainly would.
What was your personal experience on energy, mental health?
When I've been in, when I have been knowingly like in large caloric deficits, it's definitely impacted my, you know, my mental health, like in that my like patience and my tolerance gets lower and lower. And from an energy standpoint, you know, I talked about my early 20s and that experience, my energy was getting lower and I was having to like push and fight through that, you know, using willpower and just sort of, you know, willing myself to exercise more. I'm actually quite curious because like one of the things we released a newsletter on recently was that, you know, forget whatever the measurement tool is, you know, I've been fairly lean for most of the last like 12, almost 15 years. Like I can't, you know, maybe even most of the last 20 years, and probably in the single digit body fat percentage for a good portion of that, maybe the last 10 years. And, you know, it's felt good in many ways to me. It's been like sort of how I've found, I don't know, it's been a product of like the things that I love to do, the way that I choose to eat and train and move my body. And I've also never really allowed myself to, you know, put on body fat, like, and add more, you know, get into what would, I think, by some of the research be considered a healthier body fat percentage. Like a sub 10% body fat percentage is really not considered, you know, in the literature as like an optimal body fat percentage for men. When it comes to like hormone health and mental health and energy, you know, and I've suffered from mental health, you know, challenges since I was, you know, even in my teens, you know, my teenage years, and not consistently for 20 years, but, you know, periodically on and off. And I've often wondered like, well, you know, is my body composition related to that? Is that something I should experiment with? And, you know, since my early 20s, I've also had, you know, low androgens or hormone testosterone levels. That's been something that I've had for, you know, every time I've tested for the last 20 years. And that's been maybe a dozen times. So is that connected to my body composition levels? And what would that really change for me? I don't know, you know, so I think about exploring that at some point, and it feels like it would be really hard for me to do. Like, I don't know how what my relationship or how I would relate to my body in a different shape or form. So that's kind of my personal experience with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe we just put out a poll. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
And if anybody has any further questions, please send them in to us. we would probably not come back to this topic specifically the way we did already. But, if there's something else that you heard today that didn't quite make sense, or you have a personal challenge that you're going through and you want to send us a case study, and we might be able to talk about it.
Yeah. I'd also love to put a page together on our website with some nutrition resources around reverse dieting. So
yeah,
we'll let you know when that's ready for you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See ya.